Gunnery Sergeant Miller's voice sliced through the heavy silence like a bullet through glass. His tone carried command, irritation, and disbelief all at once. He wasn't shouting at his Marines. His focus was locked on the elderly man standing calmly behind the firing line. The man's clothes were simple: worn jeans, a faded shirt, and old boots coated in dust. In his hands he held something long and wrapped in cloth, the way one might cradle an old memory. His name was Dean Peters, 82 years old, quiet, deliberate, with eyes as clear and steady as winter ice. The Marines watched uneasily, unsure of what to make of the situation. The range was active, a live-fire training ground for force reconnaissance snipers. This was no place for a civilian. Miller's tone hardened as he told the old man to leave, making it clear this was restricted territory. Yet Dean didn't move. His eyes roamed across the flags on the range, reading the subtle language of the wind, something no instrument could translate. He saw stories in every flutter and shift, something beyond data, beyond technology. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost soothing, but it carried a weight that made even the wind pause. The air today wasn't just moving one way, he said, it was fighting itself. 3 different currents, each one pulling against the other. Miller scoffed, half amused, half annoyed. The younger Marines exchanged awkward glances. They'd been struggling all morning with their expensive gear, trying to calculate a shot that refused to cooperate. The target sat at over 1,700 yards, tiny, defiant, and untouched. They blamed everything: barometric shifts, the Coriolis effect, equipment calibration. But deep down, frustration gnawed at them. For all their precision tools, none of them had managed to make the steel ring. Miller folded his arms, smirking. He had no patience for superstition or backwoods wisdom. He told the old man that wind drift, spin, and pressure changes were science, not guesswork. But Dean only smiled faintly, and replied that all the science in the world couldn't feel the breath of the earth. His words weren't arrogant. They were calm, matter of fact. The flag at the target, he explained, was lying to them. Heat rising from the rocks twisted the air, pushing invisible currents that no digital meter could predict. The valley funneled those currents like water through a pipe, turning the shot path into a puzzle no computer could fully solve. A few Marines glanced at one another. One, a young spotter named Evans, hesitated behind his scope. He'd been watching the mirage dance all morning, the same shimmering waves the old man was describing. Somehow what Dean said fit. He didn't dare say it aloud, but he began to wonder if the old man wasn't guessing at all. Miller's pride was cracking. He'd spent his life mastering this craft, and here was some retired groundskeeper talking like a seasoned sniper. He mocked the old rifle wrapped in cloth, assuming it was nothing but a relic. Dean began unwrapping it slowly, reverently. What emerged silenced the range. It wasn't a sleek, modern weapon with rails and optics. It was a rifle of another time, wood darkened by decades, steel dulled with age, yet perfectly balanced. The Marines recognized it instantly. An M40, the rifle of Vietnam's Marine snipers, the same weapon used by legends. Miller laughed, dismissive and cruel, saying the antique belonged in a museum. But as his words echoed, Dean's eyes drifted somewhere far away. The sound of the range faded. In his mind, the heat of the desert became the wet breath of the jungle. He was young again, 19, lying belly down in a nest of ferns under a rain-soaked sky. The same rifle pressed against his shoulder, the same gouge in the stock still fresh from shrapnel that had nearly killed him. He could smell the earth, hear the insects, feel the tremor of danger in every breath. Through his scope, half a mile away, an enemy gunner was preparing to cut down his brothers. The wind whispered lies even then, swirling between the trees. He didn't look at flags. He looked at leaves, raindrops, the subtle bend of a single blade of grass. He understood the jungle's language. When he exhaled, time itself seemed to still. One shot, one silent impact, and the jungle swallowed the echo whole. Back on the range, the heat shimmered again, but Dean's face remained unchanged. To him, the rifle wasn't an antique, it was a companion, a memory, a lesson written in steel and blood. Evans, watching, felt a chill. He'd heard rumors about the quiet old man who tended the grounds, stories whispered in the barracks about a sniper so skilled that the enemy called him a ghost. Miller, unable to read the moment, grew harsher. He ordered the man to leave, threatening to have him detained. His words were loud, but they sounded hollow now. Evans' heart raced. He couldn't stand by anymore. He found an excuse to step away, claiming his equipment needed repair. Once out of sight, he pulled out his phone and called the armory. The man who answered, Master Gunnery Sergeant Phillips, was legendary in his own right. When Evans explained what was happening, mentioning the old man's name, the line went dead silent. Then Phillips' voice came through, sharp and urgent. He told Evans not to let anyone touch Dean Peters and that he was making a call immediately. Within minutes, chaos rippled quietly through the base. In a distant office, Colonel Marcus Hayes was in a meeting when he received the call. The moment the name Dean Peters reached his ears, he froze. There were no official protocols for something like this, but the gravity of the name alone was enough. He ended the call, slammed down the receiver, and barked for his vehicle. Within minutes, a convoy tore down the dirt road toward Whiskey Jack Range, sirens cutting through the stillness. Back on the line, Miller's patience snapped. He placed his hand on Dean's shoulder to physically escort him off. Dean didn't react, didn't even blink. The air changed. Then came the distant wail of approaching sirens, growing louder, closer. Every Marine stopped what they were doing. Dust rose from the road as black Humvees screeched to a halt. Colonel Hayes stepped out, face thunderous, followed by the base sergeant major. The silence was absolute as the colonel strode across the range. He didn't acknowledge Miller at all. His gaze went straight to the old man. When he saw Miller's hand still resting on Dean's shoulder, his expression darkened dangerously. Miller jerked his hand back instinctively as if from fire. What happened next made every Marine's heart stop. The colonel snapped into a perfect salute, sharp, reverent, and unwavering, directed not at a superior officer, but at the old man they had all dismissed. He apologized publicly, his voice ringing across the firing line. Every Marine stood frozen, realizing in that moment that this was no ordinary civilian. The colonel introduced him properly. Chief Warrant Officer 5 Dean Peters, retired. A man whose name was etched into the Corps' history. A sniper who had trained legends, who had shaped the very doctrine they still studied. The man who had been called the ghost of the Ashau Valley. The colonel asked Dean if he would demonstrate. The old man moved slowly to the firing mat, every motion deliberate and precise. He positioned himself behind the rifle. No bipod, no laser rangefinder, just skill, patience, and instinct. He studied the air, the heat, the mirage, and spoke softly as he worked, explaining the invisible forces at play. The Marines leaned in, hanging on every word. When he fired, the sound was clean and sharp. The echo stretched across the range. For 2 long seconds there was silence, and then the clear metallic ring of steel, dead center. Cheers erupted, spontaneous and raw, filling the air with awe and respect. The colonel turned on Miller, his tone low and cutting. He told him that arrogance had blinded him, that his duty wasn't only to shoot, but to learn and to teach. Dean Peters wasn't a relic. He was living history. The colonel announced that from that day forward, every Marine sniper would study the principles that Dean had demonstrated. Dean rose slowly, walked over to Miller and rested a hand on his shoulder. The same gesture returned now with calm forgiveness. He told him that technology was a tool, not a teacher. The real skill was listening, to the wind, to the earth, to instinct. The greatest weapon was understanding, not machinery. Weeks later, Whiskey Jack Range looked different. Marines no longer began their sessions with computers. They sat in a semicircle on the dirt, watching Dean Peters teach with nothing but a piece of grass and the shifting air. They learned to read the world again. The training became legendary, and eventually a new section was added to the sniper program, the Peters Wind Doctrine. Months passed. One Saturday afternoon, Gunnery Sergeant Miller walked into a hardware store and saw Dean studying tomato seeds. Miller approached him quietly, humbled. He thanked him for everything, for the lessons that had reshaped not just his shooting, but his perspective. Dean smiled, gently teasing him about planting tomatoes too close together, proving once again that he noticed everything. As Miller turned to leave, Dean told him to keep listening, to the wind, to the small things, to life itself. Miller watched him go, realizing that the true measure of a warrior isn't just in precision or firepower, it's in humility, awareness, and wisdom. And somewhere on the wind that whispered through the range, it almost sounded like the faint echo of a single perfect shot.